So welcome everyone to today's Lapworth lecture. I hope you can see me and hear me. It's slightly strange not doing this with an audience there, but I'm hoping today's lecture will be a bit different and give you some insight into some current research, some live research if you like, that we're currently doing in southern Chile. So I'm Seb Watt. Some of you there will know me. Some of you there may have seen me do Lapworth lectures in the past. And I'm leading a research project in southern Chile on a research ship called the Falkor 2, which is where we're stood right now on the bridge of the Falkor 2, operated by the Schmidt Ocean Institute. And I'll be delivering this with Kerys, who's next to me. Kerys, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, so I might be a familiar face as well. I'm often leading these Lapworth lectures, but I'm a PhD student at Birmingham as well, so here alongside the rest of the science team.
And later in the talk, you'll also be seeing Alistair Hodgetts, who was a PhD student at Birmingham and is now at the University of Edinburgh. So the three of us are here with a scientific team of about 25 people working together on the project that we're going to be telling you about. So I'm going to introduce the project first. I'll spend about 10 minutes or so just introducing what we're doing here in southern Chile. And then we're going to walk around the ship and give you a bit of an insight into marine geoscience, the methods that we're using, what we've been finding, some of the early results even, and then happy to answer any questions. So how are questions provided, Sophia? They're written in, are they? Or they can be... So maybe at the end, yeah, we can answer questions as well.
Yeah, I think maybe if Anna, you could pop them either in the chat or come over to the mic and repeat them for us, please.
Perfect. Okay. Right, so I'll start off by introducing the project and where we are. So right now actually is a good day for this. So we're stood on the bridge of the Falkor 2, looking out to the east, and in the distance I can see the high Andes. This is actually the clearest view we've had in 2 weeks, the clearest view we've had in the entire expedition, and it's happened at the time when we're moving away from the mountains. So everything's in the distance, and we would have had an amazing view a few days ago if we'd been right next to the coastline. But anyway, what we can see is a whole series of volcanoes. So from the south, this is a volcanic arc that starts at a volcano called Hudson, which is probably around 200 kilometers or so away from here. And then all the way along the mountain chain, I can see several peaks separated by 30 or 50 kilometers, all the way to a really pointy volcano in the sort of hazy distance there called Corcovado. And we can't see beyond that. But this sort of is the hallmark, if you like, of the landscape of this part of southern Chile. We're looking across an inland sea. So this is a submerged continental shelf with a water depth of about 200 or 300 meters for the most part. And adjacent to the coastline are these volcanic peaks, which are the prominent topography of the coastal region. And just beyond Corcovado, which is the volcano in the distance, is a volcano called Chaitén, which had a large explosive eruption in 2008. And it's the Chaitén eruption that is the particular focus of our project here. Specifically, we're exploring the impacts of the Chaitén eruption in the marine environment. And we're doing that principally for a couple of reasons. So the first is simply because the impacts of large volcanic eruptions in the adjacent marine region, and that's can occur at island volcanoes or at coastal volcanoes, is of general interest in terms of the hazards associated with that, so the impacts that could have on coastal communities, on marine infrastructure, on marine ecosystems, the response and recovery of those environments to major volcanic disturbances. And the second reason we're interested in this is in understanding whether we can use these marine records of volcanic processes as a route into deeper geological archives of volcanic events. So if we can understand the imprint of the Chaitén volcanic eruption in the marine environment, then we can potentially access deeper records stratigraphically by using sediment cores to explore the longer-term record of volcanic processes in the region. And that might both help us understand the frequency and the size and the style of volcanic eruptions from different sources. And it might also be used to pose other questions about what controls the tempo of that volcanic activity through time. So for example, is there a relationship between ice cover, sea level change, and volcanic behavior through time? So these sort of longer timescale questions are ones that I'm also interested in my research. So in this project, we're exploring, as I say, the footprint of the Chai-10 eruption in this marine environment. But right now, we're clearly quite a long way from Chai-10. And this is because more broadly, this is an underexplored region in terms of marine geoscience. And we're collecting data that not only will help us understand the Chai-10 eruption specifically, but more generally will help us explore sediment pathways through these inner seas of Chile right out to the continental slope. And this will let us look at different timescales from the very proximal records near the shore, near Chai-10 volcano, through to longer timescale sediment records as we get out towards the margin of the continental plate, right through to the sort of post-glacial or early post-glacial period. So the reason this part of the forearc, the landscape in front of the volcanic arc in southern Chile, is sea today, is linked to glaciation of the region. This area 20,000 years ago would have been covered by a few hundred meters of ice, extending across the sea, extending across this island in front of us, which is called Chiloé, and right out to the sort of continental margin in front of us, so where we're traveling to today. So this was a large ice sheet at the end of the last glacial maximum, and then it retreated over a period of a few thousand years to then ultimately be the sort of drowned continental shelf that we see today. And the seabed that we've been mapping shows the imprint of that glaciation. So there's a series of basins. We found glacial features on the seabed, and it's actually a very complex topography, which is also likely to be controlling the sediment pathways. So I think we'll now move on a bit through the ship itself. We'll give you some understanding of sort of the ship and how it operates, and then we'll move down to the labs and talk a bit about some of the methods we've been using. So to explore the seabed here, we've been using geophysical data to collect mapping information, to collect subsea floor information in what we call sub-bottom profiles, and to also then take samples which are planned using that geophysical data. And we're collecting samples principally through a remotely operated vehicle, or an ROV, which allows us to go down to the seabed, see the seabed visually through cameras, and collect samples in a variety of ways. So we'll talk through that. I guess first I should talk a little bit more about the Chai-10 eruption. I realise I haven't spoken a lot about that.
Up to you.
So I'll try and keep it brief. I'm not sure
Why don't
about time.
we walk as... Yeah.
I'm doing well on time.
We'll
Okay.
walk as you talk about it. So
Okay.
just before he starts, we're currently up in the bridge. So this is the main control point of the ship. It's essentially where it's being driven from. Got really cool 360 panoramic views, sort of all the sea around us. Right now you can probably see we've actually finally got some sunshine, but we do have quite a bit of movement. So we've got a bit of a roll going on. That's only going to get worse in the next coming days. We've got a storm approaching.
So yeah, you're looking at a view out to the open seas, out to the Pacific, to the west there, which is where we're heading tonight. And we're actually going to be doing our deepest dive in the morning to about 3.5 kilometers of water depth, which will take most of tomorrow, all being well with the waves and the weather. Okay.
Yeah, so we're just about to enter a corridor where people are asleep, so we're going to be a little bit quiet for a bit, and then we'll start talking again.
So I'll start talking a bit about the Chai-10 eruption, which occurred in May 2008 at what was at the time a little-known volcano in southern Chile. So Chai-10 is not a particularly prominent volcano, and it wasn't thought to have erupted for around 9,500 years until 2008. So it wasn't monitored at the time, and the eruption started without any recognised warning, and was a relatively large explosive eruption. So explosive eruptions are driven by the volatiles dissolved within the magma, and Chai-10's magma was a rhyolitic magma, so it was high viscosity, a very stiff liquid, and the volatiles within this magma, what happens in a highly viscous magma is essentially volatile exsolution causes the formation of large numbers of very small bubbles which can remain compressed or their expansion is inhibited, if you like. And this gives the condition for a very efficient ash-generating explosive eruption, so powerful explosive behaviour that generates large volumes of fine particles. So this happened in the Chai-10 event and injected a column of volcanic ash about 20 kilometres into the atmosphere, and that volcanic ash was dispersed by high-level winds right across South America, so across Argentina, over into the Atlantic Ocean. And as with any volcanic deposit produced in this way, which is what we'd call a fall deposit, the deposit gets thinner and finer with distance. So the ash in Argentina was very fine grained, had the sort of appearance and feel of flour. But as you got closer to Chai-10, this became a sandier and then a sort of more gravelly looking deposit of pumice and other sort of lithic class produced by the volcano. Now, in a fall deposit, the material blankets the landscape, and as you may have got an impression of from those images there, the landscape in southern Chile is mountainous, it's forested, and it's wet. So the hill slopes around Chai-10 were blanketed in this sediment that was easily mobilized by rainfall. And within days of the eruption, heavy rainfall had carried huge volumes of that material down into local river systems, generating sediment-laden flows or slurries of volcanic sediment and water that we call lahars. And the hazard from lahars was recognized. This is a sparsely populated region, but the major town in the area, also called Chai-10, lay at the foot of the Blanco River, which drained Chai-10 volcano. And the hazard from lahars was recognized to Chai-10 town, and the entire town was evacuated within 2 or 3 days of the eruption occurring, and actually before the lahars inundated the town. So the town of Chai-10 was hugely affected by this event. There was extreme destruction by these lahars, which flooded much of the town and left behind the volcanic sediment up to a height of 1 or 2 meters in many of the houses. They also cut a new river channel right through the middle of the town, because essentially what happens with lahars of this type is they overwhelm the channel's capacity. So the slurry of volcanic sediment and water spills over the banks of the channel and will inundate the surrounding landscape when that flow slows down, which is what inevitably happens towards the coastline. So this lahar sediment inundated the town, but it then also went into the sea and deposited very large volumes of sediment, building out a delta and extending the shoreline by about a mile in a matter of hours to days. So this really transformed the landscape at Chai-10, and a large volume of that sediment went into the ocean. And while the eruption has been well studied from a subaerial perspective, we don't understand what occurred when that material went into the ocean, how far it was transported, how it was dispersed, the impacts of that event in terms of marine sediment distribution, in terms of marine environments and ecosystems, and indeed the recovery of that system in the aftermath of this major volcanic disturbance. So that's the sort of major focus of this project, and we're working with a cross-disciplinary team to explore that. So we have groups of geophysicists here, marine biologists, oceanographers, marine geologists, and volcanologists all working together on this project. So hopefully that's a bit of background to why we're doing this research, the questions we're seeking to answer, and we'll now carry on looking at some of the equipment that we're using on the ship, which I hope will give an interesting insight into a sort of a modern research vessel and the types of techniques and methods that can be used to explore the ocean to address marine geoscience questions. So where should we start, Kerys? Should we start looking at the ROV from here?
Yeah, so currently we are stood looking over the ROV, so ROV Sebastian. Just a coincidence, it's named the same as Seb. So they're getting ready to sort of doing some minor changes on it, ready for our deep dive tomorrow. We'll get to go down and have a bit of a closer look. So it looks quite small from up here, but when you get down, it's the size of a car. Has the ability to collect a variety of different samples. I don't know, should we head down?
Right, so we're just heading down the stairs here. It might be quite noisy. I'm hoping the sound quality is okay. There's a lot of background sound from the waves. There's quite a bit of swell at the moment. so you can hear the water rushing. Oh, okay. Right, thanks, Sophia. Right, Kerys, do you want to start talking through the ROV?
So behind me is the ROV. I think if we start over here, so these sort of metal cylinders are our coring tubes. We're using a bit of equipment called a vibracore. This is a new bit of equipment that's sort of being built and tested ready for this cruise. And it gives us the ability to collect sediment from the seafloor using vibration, and it pushes the cylinder into the seafloor using vibration to move away the surrounding sediment, helping us to keep a pristine record with inside these tubes. So these are 2 meters. I think our recovery has been around 1.5 meters. But yeah, the sediment's collected in here. It's captured by these sort of cylinders on the bottom to stop it falling out as the ROV comes back up to the surface. We also have here some niskins. So these collect water samples as we are going down. So we fire them at different levels as we go through the water column, and they collect information on sort of like the salinity, the temperature, but also the microorganisms living within that. So the diatoms, the forams. And then sort of behind this, I don't know if you can maybe point the camera just slightly through, we have the push cores. So in a very similar way, Seb's going to go and point them out. These are the push cores, and similar to the vibracores, but without using the vibration, we're pushing them into the seafloor and sort of almost using a sort of, I think they're all ready for the next dive, but they use almost like a slight suction as they get pushed in to capture the top surface of the sediment. So when we're vibracoring, we lose a little bit of that top surface, especially the water sediment interface, which is particularly important for those who are looking to observe the water and the sort of microfauna that are living within that. So it allows us to capture those first sort of 15 to 20 centimeters that are often lost within the vibracore. And also all around the ROV we've got cameras. See if we can point one out.
We'll come around this way maybe. I don't know if that's possible.
Have to squeeze round.
So we can see the vibracora. Actually, it's still got some sediment on it from the last dive yesterday. So got some bit of material left over here from one of the samples that we collected yesterday. So this device on the front, this rack, is the vibracora. It's got some motors here which vibrates the device. And essentially the manipulator arms, so we've got one here and one here, can retrieve core tubes from this rack, insert them into this clamp, and then this moves up and slides down in a series of drive stages to enter the sediment through this gate here. So this is all operated remotely from the ship, communicating with the ship via an umbilical cable. So it's operated by an ROV pilot team who are very skilled at manipulating everything on here to collect a variety of samples. So you can see a series of cameras here, as Kerys was discussing. Now the vibracora rack sort of slightly blocks some of these. Without the rack, there's a bit more manoeuvrability, but because our focus is sampling on this cruise, we've principally been using the sampling methods rather than the camera capabilities of the ROV.
No, I was going to say, but having the camera capabilities is really cool. It means that we can see exactly what's happening to the cores as we're collecting them real time, but they are also recorded, so in the future, if we wanted to go back, or future people working on some of these cores, you can see exactly the conditions in which we collected them. And if you're interested in looking some of our dives, they go live when we're diving, but you can also see them on the Schmidt Ocean Institute YouTube, so you can follow along with the remainder of our expedition.
So the one other thing to mention are these sort of simpler looking devices, which are simply some canvas bags, but these have been very valuable actually to collect samples, particularly for the marine biologists on the expedition. So something as simple as a couple of crates attached to the ROV, which again can be carried by the manipulator arms and used to scoop up seabed sediment to get representative samples of what is living in the shallow substrate. And of course this is the type of information that can help us understand the impacts of volcanic inputs on the environment, what was living perhaps in unaffected areas, and what is now living in areas that were directly impacted by the Chaitan eruption.
But yeah, hopefully you can sort of get the scale of this ROV, sort of the machinery we're using. It's been a really valuable tool in sort of what we've been collecting.
maybe should just say how it's lowered. So where we're stood right now, this gate behind us opens or lifts up, and the mechanism behind me is then can move outwards to lift the ROV right out to the side of the ship. So it's lowered down from the side of the ship and on a winch, and is, as I said earlier, sort of controlled fully. So there's a full sort of connection to the ROV at all times. It's all operated from within the ship.
So because it's permanently tethered as well, we have these yellow floats that are put on the umbilical cord, there to protect the wire from sort of the waves and the currents as we're sort of moving around below the surface.
Okay.
Yeah, I think maybe if we head round to the CTD.
Okay.
Just over there. Yeah.
Do you go to the ROV control room as well?
I think we'll end there.
We'll end there. Okay. Right. So I'll just let Sophia catch up because she has the camera. So what you're seeing here as we walk past is some of the equipment we're using. The pile of core tubes is rapidly going down. We're in the final few days now of this expedition, so we're going to have enough, but we've used quite a bit. This was a larger pile of tubes before we started. So Kerys, I don't know, do you want to talk a bit about the CTD?
Yeah, so this is another really important bit of equipment we use on board. Again, it's these similar Niskin bottles. What we do is we lower this into the sea through the water column, and we can fire each cylinder at different points to collect water, but it also collects information on temperature, turbidity, salinity, oxygen, and fluorescence. And this gives us information on sort of what the water column is like, but what's living in there. So the idea of how much oxygen can tell us how much life is in that. But it's also really important for calibrating our mapping. The speed at which sound travels through the water column, so its velocity, is important enough to be able to interpret what we're seeing when we map and when we use the sub-bottom profile. But yeah, so this goes out a couple of times a day at sort of key points where we've been around. So it's feeding into the geophysics team, but also feeding into what the oceanographers are doing, looking at the currents, looking at the types of water columns we've got, as well as those who are interested in sort of like the microbiology.
Okay, should we go through to the labs?
Yeah.
So as we walk through to the labs, you'll see various members of the team working on different parts of the project. So we're just coming past one of the desks where the marine biologists are working. We've got a cold room here where lots of the core samples are being stored, and we're into some of the labs here.
Yeah, in here is the wet lab. So this is where a lot of the sort of microbiology looking at diatoms and forams is going on. We've got Jacob here. Yeah, a master student who is preparing some smear slides, I think. So he's preparing foraminifera for carbon dating. I don't know if you heard that on the mic. But yeah, so we'll move into the geology labs. This is a bigger lab. This is where we sort of, once the cores come off the ROV, the push cores, and we're sort of dealing with them, processing them. So that includes photographing, cleaning, describing, and then subsampling.
Right, so we've got a whole series of cores here on display. So it's looking busy in here at the moment, so lots of interest to see. So we've got a whole series of workstations here along these tables, and once the core comes on deck, what we've generally been doing actually is collecting duplicate cores first of all on the ROV, so that one is entirely archived for later scanning and opening in a sort of controlled laboratory environment. But there's a lot we can do on the ship, so we are opening one of the cores here because having that information as we're collecting material is really valuable for planning the next site locations. So we can see here that after a core is split, it's photographed first using this apparatus here, so we can take high resolution images. The cleaned core is then moved across for further examination and description, visual description, and then for sampling, which is what's going on with this short core here. We have, let's see if there's anything of interest, so that sort of will come up on the camera, I'm not sure. So we've got a very coarse sediment deposit here, actually, which is was from a site a couple of days ago and is much coarser than anything well, more or less anything we sampled in the other cores. I think the one over here is probably the visually most varied, actually.
Yeah, and
we
I
could
think
go around to that one.
And I think we're going to have Alistair join, who's going to talk us through the core.
Yeah, okay, I can do that. Okay. Hello, everyone. Hi. I know some of you from being at Birmingham before, but I'm sure there's plenty of new people as well. So hi, I'm Alistair. I did my PhD with Seb, and did lots of stuff with Lapworth when I was at Birmingham. But I'm now at the University of Edinburgh. I'm just going to move Natalia out of the way because Natalia is in the I'm joking. uh, so we've got a core here which we're just describing at the moment. It's a shorter core, but we've got a very sandy unit at the bottom, which has got lots of small pumice clasts in it. And as we move up in terms of this section, we've got a bit more muddy material and a very light grey layer, which might be a tephra or fine ash. And then we've got a nice kind of pretty homogeneous massive deposit, which is full of sand and various different clasts as well, different colours in there, lots of red clasts, lots of black clasts as well. It's a bit different to the stuff that's below. And then we move into this mud, which kind of grades. We've got lots of plant material, forams for all the fossil people out there. We've got some wood as well for dating things above and below these layers. And then right at the top, in this very small, less than a centimetre part, we go back into something that visually looks very similar to the sand, which is at the bottom. So full of this pumice below. So what we're doing is we're just kind of working through this. We're doing sedimentary logs to kind of come through these graphic logs to show these changes in grain size and componentry, and then we're basically describing everything that we see from a visual perspective on a macro scale. And then over to the left-hand side here, we then take smear slides. So we have these toothpicks of material which we put onto slides. We dry out the water. We put a cover slip on, and we look at them down a microscope. So this can help us to see. Here's one in preparation now. So this is the sediment, just a very small smear across the slide. Under the microscope, we can see what components are within this. So this helps us to see stuff which is better than what our eyes can see. So yeah, this is kind of the general workflow process. And then once this is all done, we add this into our descriptions. We build a bigger picture in terms of our descriptions, and then we move straight onto the sampling. So we take as little material as possible, but make sure we've got enough, mainly from the central part of the core, because these are vibrocores, so the vibrations at the edges of the core can affect the material there. Yeah, we cut out small cubes really, and we share that across the soil for various different types of sampling, analysis, and grain size, and further things from that point. And we dry them out in the oven and put them in bags, and then hopefully get them back to wherever we need to take them.
Yes,
Okay.
so I think that gives us a nice overview of what's happening in sort of the geology labs. We also have sort of a particularly exciting thing on this expedition, which not every marine expedition has, but we have an artist on board. So Jill is back here working away, working in sort of science communication and how we can show some of the results and what we're doing on board in a different way to what most scientists are useful. Yeah, so I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about it, Jill?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so this is my watercolor palette that I brought on board, and so that's what I'm using for all of these paintings. And the first piece I made is this piece. And so it's showing really like a big picture view of how we're taking water and sediment samples on board. So showing the ship and showing the sky to measure properties about the water. And these blue lines throughout the water column are actually some of the data we're collecting from this device. So this one, for example, is showing temperature with depth, which it increases there, interestingly. And at the bottom here, showing the Sebastian ROV used to collect sediment. I have it taking a sediment sample with its light on. And then a gravity core, another type of coring that we're doing to collect sediment. So that's the piece, yeah, showing the overall view, but the work I'm creating in general is meant to communicate how they're doing this research, what they're finding, and why it's important. So trying to tell stories about it and having the visuals and beauty of art, and I guess having like that more like emotional quality to it that art can achieve. So it's been super fun. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Jill.
Jill. Yeah, I think something really exciting about this project actually is the breadth of the team. You know, we've got a really diverse team here in terms of disciplinary background, in terms of nationality, and so on. More than half the team are Chilean scientists. We've got a lot of students on the ship. A lot of people for whom this is their first marine research expedition as well. So that's something that's really enjoyable actually about marine science is working with such a range of people. So we have, as I mentioned, biologists, oceanographers, and so on. We also have a school teacher from the region on board who has been doing a lot of these ship-to-shores with local schools.
Yeah, we had some really special visitors a few days ago. So we had some of the local schools from Chaitan and the surrounding islands actually come aboard. So with help from the Navy, we were able to shuttle them across, give them tours, show them around with their teachers to give them a sort of an understanding of what this big ship is doing on their shorelines. And it's important to get their understanding, their opinions, and what's happening in the areas in which they're living in. I think Danny has been really useful, and even just conveying some information about sort of the eruption in Chaitan, some of the deposits that we've seen, and sort of helping us piece together this sort of bigger picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Shall we move through to the
Yeah,
geophysics room? Yeah.
So we're going to head into the geophysics room. I think for me, this is the part that looks like a bit of a sci-fi movie. We've got all these screens doing sort of various different things, but this is the room where we do all the mapping and the imaging of the seafloor. So to map the seafloor, we use sonar. So this sends acoustic waves in the form of a sound or pings, and we measure how they reflect from the seafloor, but also how they reflect off different layers of rock and sediment below the seafloor to build up an idea of what this looks like. So this is important for knowing what's below us, but also really important for helping us choose the areas in which we're sampling or we want to send the ROV down. So these are some of the screens. These are our multi-beams. So we've got 2 multi-beams going at the moment. They work better with slightly different water depths, which is why we've both got them running. And so that is using sound to reflect off of the seafloor. It's called bathymetry. So bathymetry is the measurement of the height of the water column, so from the sea surface down to the seafloor, and this can build sort of a topographic map, so it shows you the features on the seafloor. So right now it's quite flat. We're going over, I'd say, a particularly non-interesting bit. But we have had some really cool discoveries. We've been going. We've seen sort of stratified basins, channelized structures. We've had interesting dunes, showing sort of like ripples in the sediment. And here on this screen is the sub-bottom profile. So this is what's imaging below the seafloor. So using those acoustic waves to reflect off of different layers of rock or sediment which have different reflective properties. And so it reflects the sound back at sort of different intervals, and we measure that sort of response back.
Just wondered if we could show any of the data on the screen. I don't know if that'll work, or Monica's. Oh, you can. I wonder, Monica,
Yeah.
do you have any map data up that would be good to show?
So we have Monica here, who has been
Here we are. Yeah,
working
that's
day
great.
and night to process some of our bathymetry, and she's going to show us some of the interesting parts.
Yeah. So it's worth saying a lot of this data is collected at night, particularly our mapping data, because we're doing the ROV dives and the coring in the daytime. So we're working on a 24-hour shift pattern, and particularly in the geophysics team. So there are people here 24 hours a day working on this sort of data. So I'll let Monica tell you a bit more about it.
Okay, closer. Okay. Thank you, Sophia. Okay, thank you for this opportunity of showing what we have been doing so far with the team. And yes, I'm here for like helping out and contributing in processing the first data that comes in, and trying to lay out some maps that could tell us a little bit about the topography and the geomorphology of the seafloor. And in this map, we see the whole bathymetry that we have been mapping so far since the start of the survey 2.5 weeks ago. And there are some interesting features. So as we see that the topography on land varies, we also see the topography at sea varies at the same time. And so we see, for example, areas that are very flat, but also like, for example, here we have a color scale that shows that the areas in blue are the deeper portions, and then the areas in red and yellow are those higher parts. And so, for example, here we are in a fjord, and so we see that the basin, the deeper basin, is in blue color, and then we go, as we move up, we have shallower depths, and also, as I was saying before, we see some interesting geomorphic features. For example, we can see some seamounts also that are displayed here. And so if we run a topographic profile across, oops, no, we see that, yeah, these look like some little mounds that are at the seafloor. And yes, they are between 25 and 30 meters high. So these are very interesting features. Yeah. Or, for example, we can also see the evidence of landslides, scars, like in this case, for example. Here we have a 2D version of these landslides, and if we run a profile also across this area, we see the typical morphology of a slide deposit with a scar, and also, yeah, the toe deposit. And also in a 3D view, we see this one is a little bit better, like also visualize the 3D. Maybe here, yeah. Yeah, so we see that although it's looks a little bit not very steep and looks also gently inclined, but still we have the evidence of mass movements in this area. So yeah, this is a nice tool to see the difference that take place at the seafloor. But also we have evidence of bottom currents that we can see here with these sediment waves in this area. Maybe it's better shown into a 2D view. I'm going to change into a 2D view here. So we have evidence of bottom currents here, but also at a deeper sector of the seafloor. Yeah, here we also keep having evidence of bottom current with these sediment waves, and then a channel that is eroding the toe of this steep fan that we see here on the flank of the fjord. Yeah.
Great.
Perfect.
Thanks, Monica.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that was a really nice illustration of some of the tools that we can use and how important actually these geophysical data sets are to understand the seabed in this area and the processes shaping the seabed. So without this data, we really couldn't plan any of our next steps. This is really fundamental to choosing the dive sites, to interpreting what we're recovering in the sediment cores. So both the subbottom profiles and the bathymetry are revealing a completely new understanding, really, of what is shaping the seabed in this region, because this is the first high-resolution data set of this type that's been collected in this area. And that's true for so much of the oceans. There's still a lot that we have to learn, and a lot of areas that are very sort of poorly understood. So it's exciting to work in an area like this and be sort of finding all this new information and gaining this new understanding.
Yeah, so I think now we're going to move into the room that's called Mission Control. This is where the ROV is driven from and controlled from. On the way, I just want to point out the 3D printers we have on board. So this is quite a cool part of the ship. Unlike at home, sort of in the labs we have at Birmingham, if something broke or you needed a part or a component, you could pop out to the shop to get it. You can go to the sort of the science stores. We can't do that on the ship. We've only have what we've got in storage here. So they've got something printing now, but they can print parts that they need, whether that's for the science we're doing, for the ROV, or for any other repairs. So yeah, I just think it's quite a cool part to have on board. But yeah, we're heading to the mission control room.
Okay. So if we were doing this talk on a day with an ROV dive, this would be full of people, and the curtain would be drawn actually, because the ROV dives are live streamed, so they can be watched online, or as I think Sophie or Kerys said earlier, they can also be watched later, so you can always look back at some of the dives that we've been doing.
So tomorrow we're doing our deepest dive of the whole expedition, so it'd be a good one to tune in for. Not sure what it's going to be like. It's going to be very different from some of the things we've been looking at so far.
Yeah, probably late afternoon UK time.
Yeah.
If you want to have a look at what's 3,500 meters down in the Simpson Canyon, which will be interesting to see. Yeah, Kerys, I don't know. Do you want to talk through this?
When we're diving, all of these screens will be lit up showing the different camera views of sort of all around the ROV. And these are the two pilot seats, so this is where they sit and they control the ROV from. So these sort of little joysticks and buttons and sort of levers that they move around. So it's really, really careful work, really, so, takes really tiny movements. The ROV is able, not for what science we're looking at, but is able to pick up, really tiny bits of coral and other sort of organisms right the way through to collecting cores or sort of big sort of like rock samples. But they sit here, they control the ROV. This is also where we live stream from, so it's all mic'd up. You can hear us as we're discussing sort of what's happening in science, who's directing. So we're also able to see sort of the live stream comments, try and sort of respond to some of these comments as we go.
So there's everything. A lot of these screens show the camera feeds from the ROV as well. So there's a number of cameras that give different views. And these tables behind me, there would be at least 2 people logging throughout the dive. We generally have a marine biologist here and one of the geologists there. So they're not only recording what we're sampling, and that logging is important, so you get the precise time of everything, but they can also be logging images. So for the biologist, for example, if something swims past or something's observed on the seabed, then they can log that immediately, so it's very easy to go back to the video and identify and have an image capture of that frame for later species identification.
Yeah, so
and
the
so
other
on.
day we had a very inquisitive octopus that sort of came up towards the camera, so lots of nice still screenshots of that to then, yeah, look back in and sort of help with identifying what species we've seen. And then, yeah, we have the loggers as well of the geology. So as we're collecting the cores, the push cores, the vibra cores, they're taking notes on sort of the estimated recovery, if there was any disturbance with the sediment, perhaps the angle that they've got in, and that sort of helps us choose which cores we might want to open and have a look at now, or which cores we want to perhaps archive, which ones might be best for biology, which might be best for sort of geology purposes.
Okay, I think any final spots we should go to, Kerys, on the tour? Or
No, I think that's probably, we've shown you around everything. I think here might be a nice place to stop and take any questions.